Does everybody know what a mulligan is?
I know what a mullet is.
Not a mullet, a mulligan. And it's not a drink either.
Something from Scotland.
If you're a golfer, which I'm not, but if you're a golfer, right? There you go. My resident golfer. If I am getting ready to swing and I hit the ball and it just goes zoom, and I'm wanting them to forgive me of that and not count it. Let's do another one. That's called a mulligan, right?
It's a legal way to cheat.
It's a legal way to cheat. All right. So if I can get at least one mulligan a year, this is when I want to take it. So we've talked about some strange things in the sermon series. So this is what I want you to say afterwards. If you think I've lost my rocker, then just say, you know what? We're going to give them one this time. Next time, maybe not. But we won't call the district office this time. We're just going to let him say what he has to say. And then, because I've been preparing you, this is going to get weirder. And so, this is going to get weird. So, I don't know how to prepare you other than that I need a mulligan and that this is going to sound really weird. And that I've been chewing on some of this for the last few years, so I don't expect you to just say, wow, yeah, that's exactly right, Pastor Ken, because it's just going to be too weird. I can guarantee you probably have never heard this before, even though you've studied your Bible all your life. So, this is not going to make or break your salvation, and it doesn't go against the Assembly of God doctrines or anything, but I'm just going to tell you now it's weird. If you thought that angelic hosts being with human women was a weird thing, this is just going to be just as weird. So, buckle up. So, okay. I'm just saying that because I'm just admitting that this is strange. But just as I think there's some, as your pastor, I think there's some validity to it. So I think this gives us a good picture of what we're dealing with when we're talking about spiritual warfare. So the first, and so I said this was going to be the last one, but I may need one more sermon to clean it up. So we're going to do one more to kind of clean this up. So we looked at before dissension, extending Eden. That's on Facebook, and it's also on YouTube, so you can look at all these series on there. But it was about showing us that God has this heavenly council of spiritual beings that were even existed before we did, and how they rejoiced we looked at the psalm that talks about how they rejoiced when God created the world that we live in today, and we looked then at how we were invited into that by just being placed in the Garden of Eden, that is considered to be part of God's counsel and be part of God's creation. In Genesis, we look at how God says that he gave Adam and Eve and told them to multiply and to rule and to extend Eden and to make, to carry on his rule, to rule over all these things. And that doesn't mean to be domineering over it. It just means to manage it well, to make things grow and thrive. And then we looked at the second part of the series was called Trouble in Paradise, the first rebellion, which gave you an indication that there's going to be more than one. So, and we looked at how Satan was this guardian cherub that was actually supposed to guard the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Instead, he offers it to Adam and Eve and begins. This is the first rebellion that you see of these spiritual beings. And so far, only one has rebelled. And so we looked at that. And then also recognizing that spiritual warfare isn't about just trying to figure up some as the world would do, try to figure up some incantations or something. That's not spiritual warfare. true biblical spiritual warfare, if you want to really get to understand it, is understanding there are two kingdoms in conflict with one another. So you follow the king and you do his will. And so by just following Jesus and doing the right thing, even in 1 John, we learn 1 John chapter 3, that was spiritual warfare, is doing the right thing. Right. Just following Jesus, that is spiritual warfare because you're choosing the kingdom of God over the kingdom of darkness. So when you do that, you're disrupting the chaos that he is wanting to bring into the world, that evil forces are wanting to bring. So then we looked at part 3, which was a weird one. Yes, it was called Giant Problems and the Second Rebellion. And so we looked at how it was a time of when another rebellion happened, this angelic host came, and Genesis chapter 6 came to the daughters of women, produced these Nephilim, and as weird as it sounds, that those angelic hosts that committed those horrible acts were judged immediately and sent to hell and were bound in chains of darkness. So they're not roaming around here. So where are we getting some of these demonic forces in our midst now? A lot of this Second Temple Judaism expounds on this more to help us understand that they are called unclean spirits for a reason, and the New Testament writers call them unclean spirits because they believe that it is the product, those Nephilim, those that were half angelic and half human, that when they died, that they actually became demons. So that's what we're dealing with. So, and I went more into that. If you got more questions, review those. And then today we're going to hit what's called Tower of Trouble, the third rebellion. So, and I may next Sunday take some questions to help clarify some stuff, because maybe you do have questions, because this is odd and this is a little weird. So if you missed a sermon and all of this is really sounding strange, I encourage you to watch that either on YouTube. I've got them on YouTube, or just look up Ken Rushing and you'll find me on YouTube, or you can look on Facebook and have them on there. So, all right. So now the mulligan. Does everybody say I have a mulligan? Raise your hand. Say yes. Yes. That ain't enough. All right. Everybody, raise your hand. Mulligan, 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 mulligan. Pam and Paul, mulligan. Thank you. All right. I just want to make sure I got... Don't mean to put any peer pressure on you. I just want to make sure. All right. So let's begin. Deuteronomy 4. Deuteronomy 4. All right. And I feel like I got lots of explaining to do. So I'm not going to go very long. But I feel like I'm going to have some explaining to do. So Deuteronomy 4, verse 15. You saw no form of any kind the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire. Okay? When was that? Horeb out of the fire. That's Mount Sinai. It's also sometimes called Mount Horeb. So Moses is telling the people that when you saw the Lord, you didn't see any kind of image. God spoke to you through this fiery presence, okay? And so therefore, watch yourselves very carefully so that you do not become corrupt or make yourselves an idol or an image of any shape, whether formed like a man or a woman, or like any animal on earth, or any bird that flies in the air, or like any creature that moves along the ground, or any fish in the waters below. All right? Make sure you don't worship any of those kind of things. Who's he talking to? Who's Moses talking to? He's talking to Israel, right? He's talking to the people of God, Israel. Verse 19, the next verse. And when you look up to the sky and see the sun, moon, and stars, all the heavenly array, don't be enticed to bowing down to them and worshiping things the Lord your God has apportioned to all the other nations under heaven. Whoa. Did you catch that? But as for you, the Lord took you and brought you out of the iron smelting furnace out of Egypt to be the people of his inheritance as you now are. So he's telling them, look, when you see all this stuff, and especially he goes on to say, when you see the hosts of heaven and all their array, remember we talked before that sometimes they believed that these starry hosts were also spiritual beings. They linked those together. He said, you're not to worship them. I have instead given them to the other nations to worship. Did you catch that? Well, Lord, that just seems weird. Doesn't that seem weird? I thought we're all supposed to worship you, not just Israel. Okay? But he's given them. So what's the story behind this? What's going on here? All right? I got the mulligan, right? Okay. If you've noticed, so he's telling them, all the other nations I've given to worship all this stuff. But I have taken you, I've taken you out, I've singled you out as a nation, and have want you to myself. So Israel is God's portion. Interestingly enough, when you look in the Bible about when God condemns other nations, he doesn't condemn them for worshiping idols or from following other gods, because he gave them to them. Well, when did this happen? This is weird. When did all of this occur? All right, so turn with me now to Deuteronomy 32. 32. Remember the days of old and consider the generations long past. Ask your father and he will tell you, and your elders and they will explain it to you. All right, so he's telling them, I want you to remember things way, way long ago. And if you need some help remembering, ask your great-great-great-grandfather, okay? These are things that I'm going to talk about here. He says, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, and he divided mankind. When did he divide mankind? Tower of Babel, okay? Gave the nations their inheritance and divided all mankind. He set up boundaries for the people according to the number of the sons of God. Your Bible might say sons of Israel. That's a bad translation. They chickened out, okay? Sons of Elohim is the word. Sons of Elohim is the word. So, for the Lord's portion is his people, and Jacob is his allotted inheritance. Again, the other nations have other gods. I have taken you as my own. Well, who are these other gods? He says, when this happened, when I divided the nations, I have given them over to the number of the sons of Elohim. So up to this point, this is where it gets weird. On the Tower of Babel, Genesis chapter 11, instead of doing what God commands, all people come together. And so he decides then, instead of them expanding Eden, they just want to set their own kind of worship up. So he divides their languages, gives them their own lands of inheritance territories. And it says he did it according to the number of the sons of God. So now you're thinking, okay, the Second Temple literature and some stuff like in the book of Enoch goes on to explain that if you look at the table of nations in Genesis chapter 5, I think it is, or 7, I can't remember. It's right before the flood story, so maybe it must be 5, Genesis 5. There are 70 nations that are listed of their known world. And that would have been a significant number to sort out, because in ancient Near Eastern literature, if you do have like a council of people around the king, it's normally 70. And so you have this idea that the sons of God, these 70 that we talked about that were also spirit beings, are, this is weird, okay? Okay, I'm just going to tell you the way I understand it. Okay, just pull it all out. That at the Tower of Babel, God was like, okay, I'm finished with humanity. Instead, I'm going, in the midst of this rebellion, I will end up choosing one man out of this rebelliousness, and I'm going to take him right from the heart of it, from Babylon. From Ur of the Chaldeans, I'm going to take Abraham out of all this rebelliousness, and I'm going to make a nation out of him. But all these others that have come and that continually go their own way to worship other things, they want other gods. I'm going to give them other gods. And I'm going to appoint the sons of God that are part of my spiritual heavenly council to be their God. So they're going to get a God, and they're all going to be gods. Now that sounds totally bizarre. All right? You get a God, you get a God, you get a God. Sounds like Oprah. Anyway, but I'm going to take Israel as my own. All right? Now, none of this is going to make, up to this point doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And doesn't seem, but as we read further, it's going to make other Bible verses make more sense. All right? I still get the mulligan, right? All right. So what happened? Wait a minute. This is weird. So other nations are worshiping these other members of God's council that God gives them to them, okay? So we get a weird chapter actually, in Psalm 82. So what has happened? It says, Psalm 82, that God presides in the great assembly. Remember the council, the council of spiritual beings. He renders judgment among the gods. Okay, now he's putting judgment upon the gods that he's given the nations to. Now, why is he doing this? What have they done wrong? All right, verse 2. Well, how long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. You know, you're not doing these things, he's saying. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. This was their transgression. So Yahweh, God, the Lord of lords, the God of all gods, says, the gods know nothing, they understand nothing, they walk about in darkness, all the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said you are gods, you're the sons of the Most High, but you're going to die like mortals, you will fall like every other ruler. Rise, and then he says, rise up. Then the psalmist says, rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your inheritance. Okay, so it seems like part of the narrative is that when these other spiritual members of God's heavenly council were given to the other nations, they didn't even rule well. They instead became selfish, self-governing. They didn't defend the weak or the poor or the homeless or the widow. These things that God has wanted, to help. I would imagine God's goal was to guide them all back to Him. Instead, these other spiritual beings now have thought, yeah, I'm going to be a God. I'm going to do things my way. And they've caused havoc. So God is judging them now and is saying, okay, I called you gods, you sons of the Most High, but now I'm telling you, you're going to die like men, just like normal men. And so some take this verse meaning that he's talking about different rulers, but why would he tell them that you're just going to die like men? There's good arguments on all sides of this. Some have even thought that saying that you are gods is speaking to people, all people, which I don't think that is either. But anyway, and then it goes on to say, God, you're going to take the nations back. That last verse. Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations are your inheritance. So, God, you need to take all these nations back that went wayward with these other gods. All right? So, now, this is still kind of weird. I don't expect you to accept all this, and I wouldn't either. It's taken me years to chew on this and look at some other things. But if I were to tell my wife, and she was the only woman in this room, and I told my wife, Ronlyn, you're the most beautiful woman in this room. And she was the only woman. Well, that would almost be an insult. What are you trying to say? But if this whole place was packed with women, and I said, Ronlyn, of every woman in this room, you're different. You're beautiful. You're more beautiful and incredible than all of them. Then that is really worth something, right? That's a real praise. If I told her that she's just like the most incredible woman in this room and she's the only woman, that's not really praise, is it? That's almost an insult. So look at these verses now that you've looked at before in Psalms. Next verse. I'm kind of going ahead, so. Exodus 15:11. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? I mean, no God can compare to you. Now, if there are no other gods, that's kind of a lame compliment. Okay? Then he says, are you laughing at me? Deuteronomy 3:24 says, Sovereign Lord, you have begun to show to your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth that can do the deeds and mighty works that you do? All right. So next verse. Or next one, yeah. Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way. Psalm 97:9. For you, Lord, are most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above all gods. And Psalm 95. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. Now that would be kind of lame if there weren't any other things to. But I've always considered it as, gods of your own imagination, Because rightly so, I mean, people make up gods and they don't really even exist, right? So I'm just acknowledging that the other side to this. Jeremiah 10, the next slide. But the Lord is the true God. He is the living God, the eternal King. When he is angry, the earth trembles. The nations cannot endure his wrath. Tell them this, these gods who did not make the heavens and the earth will perish from the earth and from under the heavens. So, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if there's no such thing as other gods. But isn't there a verse that says, God tells Israel, I am the Lord your God, there's no other God but me, right? There's only one God, right? Well, a good comparison to that is in Isaiah 47:8 and Zephaniah 2:15, both Babylon and Nineveh declare, say, there's none besides me. I am the only one, they say. Well, we know that they're not the only city, but what they're saying is there's no one like them. So the argument is that when God says there's no other God, he's saying there's no other God like me, and there's no other God that you should be bowing down to. I gave all these other nations other things to worship, but to you I've given you to myself, and you are to worship me only. And so now that is the weird part of this this whole situation, okay? You don't have to believe it, but it does start making sense when you look at other things in Scripture. For example, we look at, have you ever heard of like territorial gods or territorial demons, I'm saying? So the idea is that God is trying to bring the nations back to him, but they are still under the influence of these other angelic hosts that's rebelled, that said that, no, you've appointed me as their God, I'm going to stick with this. You're not taking them back, kind of thing. So I feel like I'm skipping ahead. Let me make this clear, just in case if you feel that you really need to talk to our district superintendent. There is only one Lord and one God over all. He is, and let me just call him Yahweh, because I don't know what other name, this is the name he's given himself. Yahweh has created all that is. Right. He's created every spiritual being, every human being, everything that you see and experience. There's only one God that does this, and that is Yahweh. He's the only one, all powerful, all creative. He knows your thoughts. No other God, no other spiritual being knows your thoughts and has that influence. Only Yahweh, okay? So when I say there are other gods, I mean little g. That these are spirit beings that have overstepped their authority and not doing what Yahweh wants.
Right.
When you say the word demon, that word actually is the Greek word, let me see if I can pronounce it right, daimonion, and that actually means little god. Isn't that interesting? That when you say the word demon, you're saying little god. Because they also understood that not only it gets complicated, not only are, we just say there's angels and demons, okay? So there's a lot of things going on in the heavenly realm that are just more than just angels. We looked at cherubim, seraphim, archangels and stuff like that, right? Well, it gets just as complicated in the demonic world. It's not just the Nephilim spirits. It's also these other angelic hosts that were given charge over these nations that have gone rogue for their own glory. So they are little gods, demons. That's where we get the word demons from. So, and that's the one that the New Testament writers choose to call them, these little gods. So when Jesus goes out and casts out little gods, is that weird or what? This lady was possessed by little gods, you know? This man was possessed by little gods. I don't know. I'm just saying, now it's starting to make more sense to me, okay? So look at, in Daniel 10, I have this verse up for us. And you're probably familiar with this if you're looking at spiritual warfare and stuff. Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, everybody knows who Gabriel is. He was the one that showed up to Mary and said, hey, you're going to have a baby, right? So this Gabriel, we think it's the same angel Gabriel. He's talking to Daniel now. And he said, Daniel 10:12, he says, then he continued, don't be afraid, Daniel, since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, Michael the archangel, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. Nearly all scholars agree that this isn't, I can't say all, but nearly all, that this is not talking about a human prince of Persia. They're talking about some spiritual being that is over the nation of Persia, okay? So you have Gabriel trying to do something, but he's interrupted by this other spiritual being, the prince of Persia, and they had to get Michael the archangel to help to get him down so he could get to Daniel to declare the things to him. So here you've got this idea, oh, there's a spiritual being called the prince of Persia, okay? Remember, he's a little god, you know. He's over Persia. So now that's starting to make more sense to me, all this weirdness that I just shared you. Then verse 20 says, so he said, do you know why I've come to you? Gabriel said, soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. You know, this spiritual being over Persia. And when I go, the prince of Greece will come. You know, another spiritual entity over another nation. So, but I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. This Michael the archangel. So you got these ideas, even in Daniel, of these spiritual beings that are over different nations. So anyway, some other things that may make more sense to you that you've read your Old Testament and you probably just skipped over it because it just seemed a little weird. Remember when Naaman has leprosy? He's one of the main guard warriors for the Syrian Empire, and he comes down and is it Elijah or is it Elisha? I get those two guys mixed up. One of the two. Is it Elisha? Thank you. Elisha. They tell him that there's a prophet in Israel that can heal him. And so they send him a word. And Elisha says, you know, don't even bring him to me. Just tell him to go dip 7 times in the Jordan and he'll be clean of his leprosy. And Naaman was a little ticked off. He's like, you know, I was kind of hoping he'd wave his hand over me or or do something. And he doesn't have the nerve to even to come out to see me. And the guy, his servant, said, if he would have come out and done all that, you'd have done anything he asked. And this is the only thing he asked for you to do this. And so Naaman dipped 7 times into the Jordan. What happened when he come up? He was clean. Well, did you know what he took back home with him? When he left, he took something back home with him when he went back to Syria. It's weird. He took dirt with him. What? The dude took dirt with him. Like the rest of us, when we go to Israel, we want to take some holy dirt home. Right? Rocks, okay? This is what Naaman did. You know why he did that, though? Because Israel was Yahweh's God. He wanted to bring the territory of Yahweh with him so that he could worship Yahweh and make his territory in Syria God's territory by putting the dirt down. So yeah, so the dirt thing was his way of saying, I recognize that my God in my country, I'm going to take some of God's territory and take it to mine because I want God to inhabit Syria too. So this is their idea. Jesus in the New Testament, we're going to do this a little bit more next week. We're going to look in the New Testament at these things. Have you noticed that when Jesus was casting out demons in Israel, the demons responded with, Jesus of Nazareth. That's what they called him. They didn't call him that when he went outside of the territory, which is interesting, which we're going to talk about that in a minute. So when Jesus has fed the multitudes and stuff, and he gets his in the boat to sail across the lake to the other side is important because it's not Israel anymore. It's the other side. It's the Canaanites, and it's not Israel anymore. And so because of that, there is this huge storm that you see brewing. Now, if you're a New Testament reader and you're person of those days, you'd know why this is happening because Jesus is going to the other side, and other spirits are on the other side because they don't want this Son of God going over there because that is Baal's territory. That's another God's territory. So let's stop this from happening. Jesus shows up, and what's his first encounter? A demon-possessed guy. And the demon-possessed guy doesn't say Jesus of Nazareth. He says, Son of the Most High. So, which is a declaration of that there are high beings out there, other gods, but he is Son of the Most High. And so then, yeah, it's interesting. So then he confronts him with that. This is why also Paul calls these demonic powers other things than just demons, little gods. In 1 Corinthians 2:6 and verse 8, Ephesians 2:6 talks about the rulers of this age, the powers, the authorities, the lords, and the thrones. It's not just as simple as we like to call just demons, but there are certain demons that are like lords and that have thrones, that have authority in different territories and kingdoms and things. So this is the idea. So, I know this is weird, but it will kind of, to me, it helped answer a lot of questions. Yes, I believe there's only one God. There's only one God. It's the Lord. But he gave authority to other spiritual beings over other nations, and they took advantage of it, and now are not wanting to release them back to Yahweh, still wanting to corrupt. So we're dealing with that as when we're talking about spiritual warfare. It's just not the Nephilim spirits, as weird as that sounded last week. It's just as weird as now these territorial spirits that don't want to give things up. Okay, so when we read and sing psalms about there is no other God like you, we're talking about real spiritual beings that were given charge over others that totally are a mess. I mean, I'm just going to confess my stupidity to you. When I was a young teen, and I'm still a hard worker, but when I was a young teen, I work, okay? I'll outwork anybody, okay, in the field. So mistakenly, they gave me the authority to be over a bunch of other teens my age. And I've never had that kind of authority before. And of course, I'm working like a dog all the time, and they're wanting to take a break. Heck no, you're not taking a break. We're all working. Well, you want a 15-minute break? You better make it fast, and I'll give you 10 minutes. This is kind of jerk I was when I... And okay, granted, I'm 17 years old, okay? But I expected them to work like I did, and they were like sitting down there, and I'd be yelling at them. Okay, I'd be yelling at them. I think I was a Christian. Yeah, I was a Christian then. I was yelling at them. My motivational speaking to them, you know? How many have seen people that you worked with that were in the same area, and then they get promoted ahead of you, and they like become this worst, bring them back to Jesus? And so I'm just going to read and kind of conclude with this. And so think of your questions. We'll answer some questions next week. So I'll leave you off of this, and I didn't put it up here. So if you have your Bible, you can turn to Psalm 96. I'm just going to read the whole chapter. And in light of what you've just heard from me, this gives more meat to this psalm. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth. Sing to the Lord, praise His name. Proclaim His salvation day after day, declaring His glory among the nations, His marvelous deeds among the people. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise, for He is to be feared above all gods. For all gods of the nations, they're just idols. But the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before Him. Strength and glory are in His sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, all you families and nations. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. He's making appeal to all nations to come back. He's calling the nations to come back. Come back to Yahweh. Because all the other gods, they're nothing in comparison to Yahweh. Ascribe to Yahweh, the Lord, the glory due His name, and bring an offering and come into His courts. Worship the Lord in the splendor of His holiness, and tremble before Him all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. It's calling the nations back. Say among the nations, Yahweh reigns. Yahweh reigns. Say it in Persia, Yahweh reigns. Say it in Greece, Yahweh reigns. Say it in Egypt, Yahweh reigns. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. He will judge the people with equity. Let the heavens rejoice and the earth be glad and the sea resound and all that is in it. Let the fields be jubilant and everything in them. Let all the trees in the forest sing for joy. Let all creation rejoice before the Lord, for He comes. He comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the people in His faithfulness. I think that is it. That is it. So, all right, I still got the mulligan? Good. Well, you might want to use it. All right, so if you would stand with me. Part of the takeaway with this I want to explain is that I didn't get to fully go into it. We'll go into more next week. Is spiritual warfare isn't only doing the right thing. It isn't only prayer that we've already talked about, but it's also sharing the gospel and bringing the nations, everyone, to Jesus. That is spiritual warfare. You want to do spiritual warfare? You rescue those who are in darkness. That's spiritual warfare. And this is what the New Testament is going to go and talk more about next week. So anyway, I want to encourage you as if you want to give the devil a black eye, then just plant seeds of the gospel in different people's hearts. Show love and grace, do the work of the kingdom, share the gospel, those things. That is what spiritual warfare is. And of course our prayers too, our praying. So these elements are what spiritual warfare is all about. So, and all these weird stories that I've been telling you kind of give you a context of understanding maybe some verses that we've just kind of slipped over, or maybe may have not felt like it had much meat to it. But now hopefully it does. So anyway, and if you think I just lost my rocker, then just give me the mulligan. I'll try to clean it up next week.